We can talk about how good Mad Max Fury Road is all day long. We can talk about the action scenes in which every action has an immediate and crucial consequence. We can talk about the world and how its bleakness allows us to face our own fears about the approaching death of the world. And we can talk about this guy who just really likes playing the guitar. Just look at him. He's so happy. But instead, I want to talk about something that on the first watch had me very confused. Maybe even a little... what's the word I'm looking for? Angry. Namely, Max's character arc. You see, Fury Road does something very specific with characters that I don't see being done very often. Each one of the three main characters starts the plot with a clear thesis, gets confronted by an antithesis, and ends up with a synthesis. Now, what do I mean by that? In continental philosophy, the thesis is defined as an intellectual proposition. The antithesis is simply the negation of the thesis, a reaction to the proposition. The synthesis solves the conflict between the thesis and the antithesis by reconciling them. I'm going to try to apply that triad to the characters in this movie, specifically to their goals. Let's start with Nux. His thesis is that because he and all of the other war boys are dying, the only thing that matters is to achieve some great triumph in battle and be witnessed for it, preferably by Immortan Joe himself, and even more preferably while making a sick-ass leap. Aside from the act of witnessing, the war boys don't do anything for Nux, and he does nothing for them. Why would he? Their lives have no other meaning. When Nux is closest to manifesting his highest destiny, that is not only obtaining a great victory in battle by capturing Furiosa, but also being witnessed by Immortan Joe himself, he fails in front of Joe's witnessing eyes, who calls him mediocre, and forgets about him instantly. Nux is understandably devastated by this, but that isn't his antithesis. He is still working within the parameters of his own paradigm. His value in this world is still determined by his success, or lack thereof. It is only when one of the wives shows him compassion and comforts him that he is confronted by his antithesis, that there is another way to live in this world, with caring. Now, what we would normally see a character like Nux do is one of two things. Either he would completely abandon the thesis for the antithesis, or he would stick to his thesis all the way to the end. But Fury Road finds a way in between. In the end, he does choose victory over his own life, but he does it for the wife who cared for him. He does it for a world in which compassion is possible. The synthesis of the two lets Nux change his mind while keeping his core identity. Furiosa's arc is an even clearer example. She decides, before we even get to see her, to risk everything in order to get herself and the wives to the green place. Her thesis is the hope that there is a place far away where she could live free, and that hope gets annihilated when she discovers the antithesis, that the place formerly known as the green place is now known as
that creepy place with all the crows.
Furiosa, just like Nux, is devastated. But not for long. Her synthesis is that the green place still exists and she can live there, but it isn't far away. Immortan Joe's citadel has been a green place all along, and Max convinces Furiosa to conquer it. She doesn't forget her goal, she adjusts it. Friend of the channel Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who's often mistakenly credited for the reification of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, much preferred using the terms abstract, negative, and concrete. One could shortly summarize a big philosophical concept by saying that it is only after our abstract ideals collide with reality that they can be checked. The negative doesn't mean bad, but critical. It is only after our ideals get critiqued by reality that we can develop a sturdier, more realistic worldview that is adjusted to the world without abandoning our original values. Now let's look at the madman himself, Max. Max's thesis is more abstract than that of his companions. He is haunted by the memories of people that he's failed to save, and there's nothing he can do about it now, because they are dead. In Fury Road, the word mad seems to stand for suffering from severe mental illness. Max's visual hallucinations, for example, literally obstruct his perception of reality. He is no good to anyone, a man reduced to a single instinct. His antithesis is his new connection to Furiosa and the wives, and his synthesis comes in the form of saving these people, who are still alive and in need of saving. So after he saves everyone, Max completes his synthesis through Wait, what? Furiosa goes up to her new green place, Nux dies for an actually good cause, and Max just fucks off into the crowd? Why? What's actually going on here? One answer that I've heard is that Max isn't the protagonist of Fury Road, that it's not about him. Whether or not that's true is irrelevant. Nux isn't the protagonist either, and he gets to have a meaningful arc. In analysis, there's always a point when you need to let go, when you need to just stop analyzing. Sometimes the curtains are just blue. But when a piece moves you so deeply, when you feel it, it's probably because something under the hood is working really well. And it's up to us to figure out what that is. In order to do that, we're going to take two different approaches. One is zooming out, and the other is zooming in. Let's start with zooming out. What is this movie about? And I mean all of it, not just the parts with Max. This is something that friends of the channel Schnee and Squircle helped me with, pointing out that the movie's theme is trust, or more accurately, the dichotomy of trust and distrust, caring and uncaring. This dichotomy is symbolized heavily through the feminine and masculine. Once you start looking for it, it appears pretty much everywhere. The war boys are all male and there is no trust between them. The mothers are all female and they actually care for one another. The boys shoot bullets, which the mothers call anti-seeds. Why anti-seeds? Because in order to plant something, you need an amount of trust in the people around you that they won't just take what it is that you're planting. In order to shoot a bullet, you need the opposite of that. Nux and Max, both male, both come into the movie with zero trust, and through their interaction with the feminine, grow to trust. Max washes the blood of war off his face with mother's milk. It doesn't get much more on the nose than that. Some of the wives go through the opposite arc. They start as completely vulnerable and learn to exert their will over reality and the people around them. Furiosa, right from the start, is a balanced mix of both. She's a woman that's coded masculine, capable of caring for others as well as kicking someone's ass. That made me think that I saw Max's thesis and antithesis incorrectly. It wasn't about saving people, it was about trusting them, caring for them. Max learns to trust Furiosa and he accepts that Furiosa and the wives trust him. And when he gives her his blood, there is something very vulnerable about giving someone freely, something that others tried taking from you by force. And what is trust if not making yourself vulnerable to other people? He starts his story in a world with no trust, caring for no one but himself, and he ends up learning to care for others again. This is great. So why isn't he going up to the Citadel with the rest? I feel like we got everything we're going to get out of zooming out, so let's try zooming in and see what we find. And what do I mean by zooming in? I'm going to ask you to do something with me, and it's something you've done before, though you probably haven't done it since you were a kid. I'm going to ask you to imagine with me that you're someone else, and I mean really imagine. Imagine that you are Mad Max, standing on top of a sandy hill. Imagine the heat, the sand in your hair, the layer of grime on your skin that has stopped itching years ago. Imagine the weight of the hair you can't be bothered to trim. Imagine hearing the skittering of a lizard behind you and your first thought being, food. Do you think the lizard just accidentally ran under your boot? This is a desert creature running straight for the water in your urine. You're Mad Max. You can pee out of a moving car if you wanted to. You chose to pee standing in order to bait some food. Imagine that you are the kind of person that is okay with eating the kind of creature that would drink your urine. Imagine that every once in a while, whether you want to or not, you just remember that these people trusted you to protect them, and you didn't. And they died horrible deaths because of that. Because of you. Imagine that it hurts every single time that the memory comes up, and whatever you do, it won't stop. Imagine that you are the kind of person who endures this extreme level of objectification and just walk it off. And you just keep doing things. You don't need a moment to be in shock because you were already in shock before, and you're going to be in shock after, and you're going to be in shock tomorrow and the day after that. Not that you even think about that anymore. You have been in a state of shock for years now. Fear is indeed the mind killer, and when the mind is gone, all that's left is instinct. The parts of your brain that developed so early that you still share their basic structures with the lizards that you eat. And that part isn't as good at calculus and etiquette as your conscious mind, but it is very, very fast. And sometimes that's all you need. Imagine being so afraid you stop thinking like a human being. Instead, all you do is identify the nearest source of danger or the likeliest scenario in which you are hurt and do what you can to prevent that scenario from taking place. Dying of thirst? Get some water. Now that you've got the water, you can start worrying about the chain trailing behind you. Get one of the girls to cut it off, but not Furiosa. Furiosa is dangerous, so you make sure she stays away. It's not that you're not intelligent, you are. You just really don't do anything but survive this moment and make it to the next. Side note, this isn't a protagonist you often see because this protagonist didn't adapt to our world. Max is a product of this fictional world that doesn't really exist. So somebody had to imagine that world and figure out what kind of person Max would become in it. This is, in my opinion, what separates good and bad speculative fiction. But then again, it's not all new. We do have people in similar situations in our own pre-apocalyptic world. Ched Robinshaw of the Mighty Oaks, an organization dedicated to the rehabilitation of US Army veterans, writes, "Something I struggled with, that many veterans struggle with, is difficulty managing strong emotions. These often include high levels of anxiety and hypervigilance associated with the stress of constant risk of danger while deployed. These behaviors, although appropriate and encouraged in a war zone, result in problematic behaviors when returning to civilian life, like feeling on edge and being easily triggered. This causes issues in many areas of life related to reintegration, including employment, family problems, and social connection." Now remember, Max isn't just suffering from common PTSD. He has hallucinations so intense that they impair his function. And as great as his time with the girls had been, I doubt his condition can be cured so easily. It's not hard to imagine Max trying to chill out and failing, seeing aggression where there is none, scaring the hell out of everyone, and generally just ruining the vibe. And I think Max himself sees this too. So what? He just gives up? Goes back to the same life he had before? No, because he chooses to leave of his own volition. He chooses to protect Furiosa and the wives from his madness, and he chooses also to be out in the desert where he might find more people he could save. He started the plot with a mind-shattering debt to the people he'd failed. Perhaps he feels like the debt is paid, and he's free now. Perhaps there are more people he needs to save before feeling like his debt is paid. We don't know. Men will literally go alone into the post-apocalyptic desert instead of talking about their feelings. What we do know is that the man who came from the desert isn't the one going back to it. He goes back on the Fury Road, a human being, capable of caring and trusting other people. That is his triumph. End note. Some people say that this movie is bleak. I disagree. Sure, the prediction it makes about the world isn't exactly optimistic, more like realistic if you ask me, but the characters, starting in those dire circumstances, are capable of growth, of adaptation, and of making for themselves a life worth living. Except for Knox, who dies, but, at least he gets to die for a cause he believes in, which is pretty sweet. And in a world that sometimes feels like it's dying, in a society where trust sometimes feels like a bygone luxury, where we can, feel like we're too damaged to be of any help to anyone, I think there's value in a story that reminds us that even in the harshest circumstances, we can choose life, build trust, make allies and even friends. Is it just a movie? Sure. But as a friend of the channel, William Blake, tells us, everything that is possible to be believed is an image of truth. And what is the role of art if not to show us possible images of truth? Thank you so much for watching this far, truly. If you enjoyed this video, you might also enjoy my writing. I recently published an alternate history novella called In the Pits. It tells the story of two soldiers who go into an underground cave to excavate for a crystal used in making bombs that also causes these supernatural alterations in human beings. The deeper they go into the cave, well, you can probably see where this is going. It is a horror story, but one of subtle, quiet horror, leaving more room for the characters and their relationships to be explored. One reader even described it as a leisurely stroll into the abyss, which I simply love. You can read it for free in the link below. I'd also like to give a very special thank you to friends of the channel Schnee and Squircle for both helping me out with the analysis, as well as giving me the push I needed to actually start making video essays. I genuinely wouldn't have succeeded in making this video without them. Even more thanks to my buds Arcana17, Colin D, Colin, Dan the Learner, Cesna, and Duck for all their help. Until next time, I have been Gnome, and I hope you come out of watching this with a little bit more hope.